find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, what is today's provocative topic?
If men have all the power, how come women make the rules? An interview with Jack Kammer.
Yes. Now, I hope, let's see, if we pissed off about, 60-70% of our people? I'm not sure.
Maybe.
Depends. I don't have good enough analytics to know. And I will even be frank that that title comes from one of the books he wrote. Mm-hmm. And that's not all we talked about.
No, actually. We didn't talk a lot about that, but
Yeah.
we talked a lot about power dynamics. So, yes, you will hear that discussion.
You will indeed. So I hope you will stay tuned for that. Let's just put in a brief word for our various books and other products of our creative lives here.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have Betrayal and Forgiveness. If I can hold that up, How
Those
to
of you who
Navigate
are
the
viewing
Turmoil
it.
and Learn to Trust Again.
Yep.
That's Bruce's latest book. The previous one was It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong.
Which, by the way, we alluded to. I don't think I mentioned the title in our interview, but
Right.
we alluded to that book on a couple of occasions.
Right, about choosing therapists.
And about improv, too.
And
That's
improv, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the book that started our podcast, Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
Yeah, and you know, the other aspect of It's Not About Communication we touched on was ideas versus ideologies,
Yes.
which I have 2 chapters in that book all about.
Yes.
And let us also mention
Uh,
the beautiful book that you did, if you can reach it. I didn't make
It's
it
out of
accessible.
reach.
There we
It's
are.
out of reach. Here we are, The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber.
Laria
My
Zilber.
nom de plume.
Yes, your nom de plume. Beautiful book of erotica and biblical erotica, which if you think is an oxymoron, you need to check out that book, and you will
Exactly.
see how much of an oxymoron it isn't. It fits together beautifully. So let's get on with
Let's
our
get
interview,
on.
and we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Jack Kammer. Jack is a social worker and author who has the distinction of being a target of cancel culture well before the term was coined. His books include Goodwill Toward Men, Women Talk Candidly About the Balance of Power Between the Sexes, first published in 1994 by St. Martin's Press, which decided to stop promoting the book when several of its staff members were offended by the book's critique of feminist orthodoxy. Obviously humbled by that experience, Jack went on to publish another book, If Men Have All the Power, How Come Women Make the Rules, and Other Radical Thoughts for Men Who Want More Fairness from Women. Jack, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you, Judy. It's great to be here, and Bruce, it's nice to meet you too.
It's great to meet you too. So we always like to start off our guests just asking, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
Well, I just discovered that maybe I've been doing this longer than I knew. I have been saying, when asked that question, that it goes back to the early 1980s, when I was on a co-ed softball team, and two consecutive weeks after 2 consecutive weekly games, I was with female co-workers, female teammates, and they were talking to me separately on separate weeks about their boyfriends. They were telling me tales of woe about their boyfriends. And then they ended their stories by saying, "And so he's a real jerk, don't you think?"
Mhm.
And all I could say both times was, well, maybe he's a jerk, based on what you're telling me. Maybe he's a jerk, but, from my point of view, thinking, like a man might be thinking, maybe to him it looks like this. And I offered a perfectly plausible explanation. At least I thought it was perfectly plausible, not definite, but within the realm of possibility. And both times, both women said, "Oh my God, I never thought of that."
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could have predicted that that's what they said.
Mhm.
And it became clear to me that the male point of view was not very well understood for a lot of reasons. One of which is that there is a predominant view of what goes on between men and women, which often tends to think that the man is wrong. And the other part of which is that the male point of view is often not very well articulated. Men don't express what's really
Yeah.
going on deep down in their souls. Even if they're able to figure it out and put it into words, it's hard to do. But then last night, believe it or not, an old college buddy of mine made a recommendation for me on LinkedIn. And I didn't even know he had made that recommendation for me until last night. And what he was saying in his recommendation of me was that in 1973, when we were in college, I was talking about this stuff. And
Wow.
maybe and maybe I was, but I didn't really know I was talking about this stuff. I mean, maybe it's because
Interesting.
there was no term for it, no label for it. The idea of men's issues, I probably had never heard of that. And men's movement, probably never heard of that. So, it goes back maybe to 1973. I wrote to my friend who had given me this recommendation that I never even saw or accepted on LinkedIn until I haven't even accepted it yet. I wrote to him and I said, what was I saying in 1973? And I'll be interested to know what he remembers.
Uh-huh.
All I can think is that he was in the Naval Academy and he left. And I think it was probably based around that and the discussion of narrow expectations of what good men and strong men and capable men are supposed to be. And and he didn't measure up. And I think, maybe I was trying to, help him feel that it's not necessarily any indication of him, but rather the indication of what the Navy needs from its men, not necessarily what we as a society need from, our whole vast panoply of men.
Yeah.
So this is going on for 50 years we're talking about here.
Sounds like it. I could take it back even a little further to about 68 years if you want to hear real quickly what that was about.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tell us about
Okay.
that.
Well, so how it's not a good thing for people to say to girls who are good at sports, gee, Susie, you're really good at sports for a girl.
For a girl, yes.
Not a good thing to say. Or,
Yeah.
gee, Susie, you're really good at math for a girl.
For a girl.
Girl.
Not a good thing to say.
Yeah.
Very harmful in a lot of ways. What I used to hear as a little boy was, gee, Jack, you're really good with babies for a boy.
Boy,
Mhm.
right?
And I, of course, had no concept of, men's issues. I had no concept of a men's movement. I had no concept of bias and stereotypes and expectations and gender roles. But I just sort of remember thinking, what is up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just sort of feeling like maybe somebody's trying to tell me I, should be out playing war or something.
Mhm.
But I didn't let it get to me. I continued,
Yeah.
my interest and affection for, kids. And I still am pretty good with babies, even though I don't have any of my own. I've never had kids myself. I just love babies. So, I think that actually, the idea of men being generative and nurturing and caring and kind is really probably the central issue in the men's movement, even though it's not articulated that way. And the reason I say that is because the opposite of men making progress on the gender role front, the opposite of that is all of the stereotypes that are put in our way. Now, they were put in the way of women too. Women couldn't be in big business and corporations and academia because women cry too much, they're silly, they're not logical, all of those stereotypes. Getting rid of them was central to women's progress. Central to men's progress is the idea that men are not kind, caring, generative, nurturing. They just want to have sex and drink beer and watch football and, all of those stereotypes. And, I'm a person who doesn't really like those stereotypes. And I'm happy when I can prove them wrong with my interactions with kids and babies.
Yeah.
So there's a question, of course, you even mentioned it among the questions you are frequently asked, I have to dispense with, of course, which is, gee, Jack, why do you hate women? You must also hate America, right?
Well,
Tell us about
yes.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, why do I hate women? Oh, well,
Yeah.
you have a personal problem, and you must not have loved your mother. All of those things. Yes.
Mhm.
So my response to that is that the biggest cause of misogyny right now is overuse of the term misogyny.
Yeah, well.
Because if a person who dares to say women are human and women therefore cannot be perfect, any man who dares to suggest that there might be some things about female culture that aren't so helpful in the macro view, any man who dares to point out that women are not perfect and sometimes do things that are wrong, being called a misogynist doesn't really help the situation, because what does he do with his negative feelings about women when he is suppressed from saying them? They don't go away. They don't get therapeutic. They don't get therapy. They don't get relieved. They don't get understood. They just go underground and get deeper and darker and
Yeah.
and that man gets driven into these rabbit holes and echo chambers of really bad things about women.
You're touching on one of my favorite topics, actually, which because it goes well. Actually, I'll finish that thought, but it goes into another thing I want to ask you about. One of my favorite topics is the difference between ideas and ideologies, and the concept that there's lots of embedded misogyny in how men are raised isn't a bizarre concept. It's an idea. When you elevate it to an or reduce it to an ideology that has to be defended, and this is my general statement about ideologies, it becomes a caricature of whatever the good idea was. So that the notion of constantly calling out misogyny has the effect of increasing misogyny. It's like we did we could call it an episode, or we could call it Bruce's rant,
Yes,
in
we
one
can
of our
call that.
recent episodes, where I was saying, it's interesting. Diversity, for example, is a really important thing in the human species. It's a feature of evolution. It makes us resilient. Diversity is a good thing. You don't do diversity by talking about diversity and calling out lack thereof. You do diversity by being who you are and not being an asshole to people who are different. That's how you do diversity. So it's interesting, calling out misogyny. I'm not saying that's a bad concept. It's an idea, but exactly as you're saying, when you solidify it so that no, you can't say anything without being accused of misogyny, then it perversely turns into something where all of a sudden misogyny increases. It has the opposite effect.
So I knew this was going to be a different podcast for me, and it's already true that I'm going to be learning a lot more from you than you're going to be learning from me.
Oh, I think it'll go both ways. So.
Well, no, first of all, I'm not I am a retired social worker, but I was not a psychotherapist type social worker. I was a macro level social worker, where I worked on, the cultural level, the systemic level, laws, regulations, rules, institutional, those kinds of things. That's what macro social workers do. They work on infrastructures.
Oh, yeah.
So, if for no other reason than that, we're going to be talking about psychotherapy today, I hope, because men can sometimes very much benefit from couples counseling. I know I have with my wife. And I would hope that we're going to talk about the many reasons as portrayed brilliantly in your video, your very funny video about that.
Oh, you saw, yes, the one about how to get your reluctant guy to go to couple therapy. Yes.
It makes me laugh. It's brilliant. It makes me laugh. It doesn't make me defensive as a man. And I hope that we can have a podcast that I can send to my very few followers. I'm a social media basket case, but there are some people who know me who don't know you, and I will send them this podcast, and I would hope that you would be able to describe your video, so that and maybe even provide the URL in the show notes, maybe.
I will make a point of it. Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Easily done. I don't need to be asked twice.
Good. Yeah, it's really funny, and I hope that we can help men feel like couples counseling can be as good for them as it can be for the woman, and ideally is most beneficial for the relationship.
Mm.
For sure.
Well,
Yeah.
so
Oh, I
yeah.
was wondering, what was it about in your critique of feminist orthodoxy did the women have a problem with?
That's St.
Well,
Martin's Press you're
Yes,
talking
at
about.
St.
Yeah.
Martin's Press.
this was a book of interviews with 22 women, most of whom identified themselves with feminism. Most they identified themselves as feminists. But what does that word mean?
Mhm.
Ideally, it means person who's really interested in equality between the sexes. And that's the sense in which these 22 women were feminists. But the definition of feminism, or at least the reality of feminism as practiced, as an ideology, maybe I should say, has changed. And it's not so much about equality between the sexes, because it's not very much about how men can get more than we have in domains from which we have been, for sexist reasons, largely excluded. And you might imagine that the realm that I'm talking about, that men have been largely excluded from as equal partners, is the realm of love, romance. No, I shouldn't say romance, love, intimate relationships, parenting, nurturing, being a father.
Yeah.
And this is back in the 90s that we're talking about. So it's
Um,
before.
yes, this was in 1994. And so my book was a book of interviews with 22 women who talked about not just the disadvantages that women have as women, but the advantages that women have as women, and not just the advantages men have as men, but the disadvantages men have as men. Sort of the missing half. And it's
Right.
really the missing half that Betty Friedan had in mind in 1963 when she wrote The Feminine Mystique.
Mhm.
When I went back to read that book, I was expecting the bad kind of feminism.
Right.
No, she was the good kind of feminism, of feminist. She was very understanding and sympathetic to men. And later on in 1980, she wrote in Red Book, the dialogue has gone on too long in terms of women alone. Let men join women at the center of the second stage. And so I think the people at St. Martin's Press who refused to help my book be sold and marketed were not the Betty Friedan kind of feminists, but rather the red stockings kind of feminists. Do you know the term red stockings?
I don't. Although I think I've heard it, but I don't know what it means. What is
It's
it?
a group of women in New York who issued the Red Stockings Manifesto, and I think it was 1969. And they're the ones who, as far as I can tell, are the ones who originated the idea of men as women's oppressors,
Mm.
and that women's lives are totally oppressed.
Ah,
Some of that might be true, but not as an absolute ideology.
Mhm.
right.
So, yeah,
Yeah, and it's well, and you've that notion, yeah, not as an ideology. What I've noted, and between the two of us, I'm the therapist, and Judy, as we often say, she's a retired educator, but I'll still point out she's the real person. I'm the therapist, she's the real person. But provides all sorts of balance for that. Also, the occasional hook as needed. But that phenomenon, what I've noted in working with folks over the decades that I've been doing it, about 30 years of seeing folks, is I keep hearing from women, often feminist-minded women, that men don't have a clue how to do it. And I keep hearing that from men as well. We don't have a clue, we as a group, especially, I'm an old guy, do I say this? Younger folks especially, don't seem to have a clue as to know how to be a man respectful of women, but to show up as the guy. What I keep hearing from these women, and I should turn to you and, and invite your comment, is these guys don't know how to show up and be the guy they're looking for.
Well, I think the rules changed mid-game someplace.
Mm.
Would you agree, Jack, that the rules of what it means to be a man have changed?
yes, and I think it's also true that the rules of what it means to be a woman have changed, but
Correct.
they've changed for women, they've changed in a much more liberated way, a much more
Yes.
free way, a much more encompassing way, many more options now available to women, and still be
Absolutely.
full-fledged, honorable women.
Yeah,
I think maybe the opposite is what's transpired for men.
Mhm.
I think so. I think men don't know how to be men anymore because what it means to be a man, what it did, like when I was growing up, it was, women, you got married, you had a husband who could support you and who could take care of you when you stayed home and had the babies, blah, blah, blah. Well, suddenly we go out to work, we're having the babies, we're having a job, and oops, you're not helping enough, right? And he's like, I'm doing what my father did, and suddenly that doesn't work anymore. So what are the rules for men now, and how do you be a man now? So that's, I
And
think,
it's,
what you're talking about and writing about.
yes, and it's very difficult for men to sort of figure out, well, let's see, what's really important to me in my life? How do I maintain my integrity in my life? At the same time, you have mountains, mountains, a fire hose of scrutiny being directed at you. And, one person who calls herself a feminist might say, well, no, that's okay. And another person who calls herself a feminist says, no, that's offensive. And it hasn't been a very organic process for men where we've been allowed to sort of grow and feel our way through. Um, it's like we are in a subservient position and we must respond to the judgments of other people, regardless of how they feel to us and what we might want to say in response about, well, okay, I could do that better if you could do this better. And men don't have that opportunity to talk about what kind of changes we would like to see in female culture, the way they have been able to talk about the changes they demand in male culture.
Mhm.
The whole idea
What
of
kind of
toxic
changes would you like to see?
in women.
Uh-huh.
Well, think about the stereotypes that men had to overcome. The stereotypes of women men had to overcome. Women are silly, they cry too much, they're too emotional, they can't be good leaders. All of those things were, I think, intended in one way or another to keep women out of man's domain.
Correct.
It's not that you're bad, you're wonderful over here in this space, but in our space of being corporate leaders and being professors and being doctors and astronauts, you're just really not good at that. And so you can't come over here. This is our domain. I'm the man, right?
Mhm.
Now we've broken down those stereotypes, and accordingly, women are much more free to be accepted as fully equal in the previously male domain.
Many of those domains, by the way, at least several of them, I'm thinking like doctors, and various kinds of professionals. The new ones who are coming out of graduate schools now are overwhelmingly women.
Yes, yes.
Men
So
men don't seem to know how to do that anymore.
yes, um, the um, the success of the women's movement to open up things for men, for women, has been far greater than the success of the men's movement, which is questionably even existing, to open up options for men. And so, to answer Judy's question, what kind of things would I like to see change in female culture? Their embrace of anti-male stereotypes and unjustifiably pro-female stereotypes. The primary pro-female stereotype that I think would be helpful for women to at least think about is the idea that women create life. Create life. Now, maybe it's because I grew up Catholic and the nuns beat it into my head that the only entity that creates anything is God.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
We might make stuff, we might facilitate stuff, we might help stuff to be and to grow, but the only entity that creates anything is God.
Mm.
And when women say they create life, I think what that evidence is an idea that they are closer to God than we men are, who are closer to, I don't know, the devil or at least animals.
That's your Catholic
That's your
part
Catholic
talking.
part. We're Jewish.
Yeah. Well, I found out about 10 years ago that I am 25% Jewish, but that's another
Wow.
that's another
That's
story.
another story. Yeah.
That's another story, and it's a very interesting one.
Hmm.
And so so that's the truth of the matter is about creating life is that
Yeah.
it is the union of the ovum and the sperm that sparks life. It's the zygote that is the magic of life.
Mhm.
It's not the woman creating life. It's, an egg without a sperm is pretty much like a sperm without an egg. They
Mhm.
both don't amount to much.
Not much.
So that would be one stereotype that I would like to see women sort of get a better handle on, and what it indicates about other stereotypes that are connected.
Mm.
The negative stereotypes that I think many women hold about men that tends to keep us out of their traditional domain is the ones I recounted quickly a little while ago. Men aren't kind, caring, gentle, patient, nurturing. They, on the negative side, just want to have sex, and they're violent and they're cruel and they're competitive all the time and overly aggressive. And it's not that that's bad, fellows. It's okay, in its place. But I'm the mother.
Mhm.
I'm the mother. And that has to change if we really want to have equality between the sexes and really respectful relationships
Mm.
uh,
You know,
between men and women.
so just to follow up on that, I want to look at the other side of that a little bit, because I think indeed again, I guess I'm stuck on my notion of ideas and ideologies. When it's an ideological notion that says, oh yeah, men are good at this, women are good at that, we have to defend that. That becomes pernicious. It's nasty, and that everybody seems to lose from that. On the other hand, and of course you're not saying this, but if you utterly attempt to ignore the fact that there are characteristic differences between fathers and mothers, not just men and women, but between fathers and mothers, that those are, and again, I'm not trying to say that those roles should be rigid at all, but to the extent that there are clear differences that both sides seem to really want, that gets lost in the ideology of equality.
Yes,
And
and
yeah.
and as you referred to a few minutes ago, the idea of diversity is very much
Yeah.
at play here. Well, I recognize differences between the way men deal with children and the way women deal with children, generally speaking.
Mhm. Yeah.
Generally speaking.
Right?
And it's not binary where women do it this way, all women do it this way, and all men do it that way. No, there's a lot of overlap.
Mhm.
But to the extent that there are differences between female parenting styles and male parenting styles, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a feature, not a bug of evolution.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It only becomes a bug if we find it threatening to each other.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
My way is the right way. A healthy relationship. I've never been a couples therapist, but a healthy relationship has got to involve respect
Mm-hmm.
for
That's where
for
it
each
starts
other's.
from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where you run into the problems when everybody is, they're at loggerheads and saying my way, my way.
Well, I'm better than you at this.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you
So
can't make that assumption just because a woman is a woman that she is better at parenting.
Well, and yes, that is true. And yet also, a lot of times it comes up in couples therapy around those very issues where, the woman may be saying, I wish he would do more of this.
Uh-huh.
But then when he tries, he isn't as good at it for all kinds of reasons, including the fact that he hasn't had much opportunity to do it, hasn't had much inclination to do it.
Right.
And she has a hard time often letting him not be as good at it to get better at it. And she's got a
and
point, but so does he,
yes, and I just watched a video of you talking about therapy as improv.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
yes indeed.
go ahead.
Yes, and
So I will say yes, and There are many situations in which it's not clear at all which is the better way,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
especially when dealing with a problem that a child might be facing. What should we do about this?
Yeah.
You know, and so there's got to be the opportunity, there's got to be the flexibility for synergy, for magic to happen, like an improv, for something completely unexpected to happen when two people put their best selves forth and together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of my definition, operationally speaking, my definition of intimacy. You know, in a broad sense, intimacy is when both parties show up honest with themselves and each other in the moment. And what happens there is unpredictable, but it's growth. It's organic growth. It's like, yeah, they form a joint mind, and joint minds don't think like either of the individuals do. They think thoughts they wouldn't have thought. And that's true in any conversation. It's true in our conversation. You know, we're all thinking things we wouldn't have thought without all talking to each other. And when that goes well, it's beautiful. And in a couple, it can rise to the level of holy. You know, it can be sacred.
Yes.
It can also be toxic as hell when people are simply, you know, when people have that sense of, oh my God, everything you're saying is wrong. You know, they're not in yes and mode, they're in no damn it mode.
No damn it mode.
Which is,
That's
you know,
right.
when couples arrive with me in the first session, I'm trying to be in yes and mode, but they're usually in no damn it mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my hope, again, maybe we can undertake this. I know it's your podcast and I'm your guest and I should, you know, follow your lead, but I am a man who has benefited very much from couples therapy.
Yeah.
And I did that without any loss of my integrity, but rather with an affirmation of my integrity with a very skillful therapist. I think
That's pretty important, that part.
Exactly.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, as your wonderful video that you're going to refer to in your show notes makes perfectly clear, there are lots of reasons why men are often reluctant to get into therapy. And that's a problem because couples therapy can be really good for men as it can be for women as it can be for the relationship. But there are these 10 reasons that at least the women think are the reasons why the man doesn't want to go into therapy. I would like to have you talk about, and I can, you know, ask you questions to help flesh it out. How can men who are being asked by their wives or girlfriends to go into couples therapy, how can they get confident that that's a good idea?
Yeah. Well, I want to start by asking the woman in the conversation, because you, in a past relationship, I think you had some experience of this particular issue, as I recall, hearing from you. And if you want to comment on that from your perspective, first of all, if you want to sort of talk about, you know, I know you've seen my video, but if you can talk about, like, why do you suppose, you know, the guy in your life at that time didn't want to? What was your understanding? And then similar to Jack's question, you know, what do you think would help with that?
Oh, why he didn't want, I don't know why he didn't want to do it. I could guess after seeing all your stuff, but the reason I wanted it to happen is because the marriage was in a horrible place and I knew it was going to end if we didn't do something. And ultimately it did end because he didn't want to do something. So the something in my eyes was work on the marriage, go to therapy, be able to talk about, we couldn't talk about our problems ourselves. I thought maybe seeing a third party that could help us would, and he didn't want to do that. So I said, you know, I'm done. So
what I'm curious about is,
Yeah.
did you interpret that as, I mean, how did you interpret his reluctance?
I interpreted his reluctance as I don't want to work on this marriage.
Yeah. That's one of my theses, right? That what women tend to think, you know, there's yes, I listed rather whimsically speaking, I listed a bunch of things I've heard from women, but I think, and you can comment, of course, women tend to think it's because he doesn't care or he doesn't want to work on it. He doesn't care enough to do it. And my basic thesis, as you saw in the video, my basic thesis is, yeah, women think that for good reason because that's what men say. Men say stuff that leads you to think that. But I think it's because we're scared shitless. And I think,
Great.
and not only are we scared shitless, but I also claim we have good reason to be scared shitless because
I do,
that
yes.
skill for therapist you went to, and I'm a therapist and I'm made my share of boners over the years, I'm sure. But a lot of therapists aren't very skillful with respect to that, dealing with that fear. They don't respect that fear. They think the guy's just an idiot. And not just women, by the way.
Yeah.
Men will often treat men like that as well. And so that phenomenon of recognizing, oh, you don't want to do this because you're afraid, and you actually have good reason for that. I think when a woman realizes that, it opens up the conversation. It's like, oh, you're not crazy, are you? You're scared. Of course, again, men tend not to say we're scared because, especially to women, we don't want to admit it even to ourselves. But if she's recognizing, oh shit, you've got good reason why you're thinking this could go really badly. You know what? Yeah, we know our friends, the so-and-sos, where they went to therapy and they were Splitsville. So you have good reason for that.
So can we talk a little bit about, in particular, two reasons on your list of 10 things that women say is the reason that their man doesn't want to come to therapy? Can we talk about what's legitimate about the possibility on the man's part that these two reasons are somewhat founded in some reality?
Sure. Yeah. Which two are you thinking of?
Number 4 and number 5. Number 4 was that the therapists are prejudiced against men. Even male therapists
Yeah.
can be prejudiced against men.
Yeah.
And the legitimate basis that I want to lay out for you, that I hope you can dispel for the men who would like to develop confidence that they don't have to worry about this. The legitimate basis is that the whole realm of psychotherapy, couples counseling, I believe was really damaged in the minds of men when the APA, the American Psychological Association, came out with its whole toxic masculinity rubric. You're familiar?
I'm not, oddly enough. You'd think I would be because I'm a
you've heard the term-
psychologist, but I'm not.
Yeah, you've heard the term toxic masculinity.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the APA had a specific
Well,
definition.
I don't know that they use that phrase, but they did come out with statements that I don't think the media really portrayed very accurately. But the message that men got, or very plausibly have gotten, is that the APA has said that masculinity is inherently unhealthy. Now, I think what the APA was trying to say was, look, some habits that we've been inculcated with, told that we should have as part of our identity as men, not talking, not admitting that you don't know the answer to something. That's toxic. But what the APA meant was, that's bad for you, men. That's bad for you. But the trickle down throughout the culture, especially in a culture that is not very friendly to men these days, and is always looking, in my view, for opportunities to say, see, that's how men are. They're just no good. You can't trust them. Certainly can't let them be around kids. That men have good reason to feel that I am viewed by the psychotherapeutic community as flawed, inherently flawed.
Yeah, I think that is one that has at least, and I can only speak of my experience here. I haven't done a lot of research on it per se, but I've talked with people for 30 years. That sure does sound like a common understanding in terms of how a lot of therapists are trained and supervised, that you're on the lookout, at least again, I'm thinking of my training, which now is going back like 30 plus years, that you're on the lookout for the nasty aspects of sexism, which involves, sexism as disadvantages women. And that's what you're on the lookout for. And I remember that early in my career, what would tend to happen, I remember a particular circumstance that is sort of iconic in my memory, where I was working when I was an intern, and I was working in children and family services for a particular local mental health agency. And I had a female colleague who I actually learned a great deal from. I respect her greatly. And we were working together with a family and being observed by our supervisors and other students and stuff like that. The family volunteered for this. And I found what I would do often was when the guy was being an asshole, well, sometimes he was. I mean, we do that sometimes. Women too, sometimes, actually. But what I would find is I would start being an asshole back to the guy. In other words, I would start fighting with the guy. I would have to be the one who was fighting with the guy, which of course rendered me an asshole. And it was based on that very phenomenon. It's like I would see something in him that I recognized in myself that I didn't like, and that I would have to fight with him. And it was actually among others, my female colleague afterward who pointed out that I was doing this. And it wasn't real helpful to the women. Like I'm thinking I'm being Sir Galahad, and she's saying, no, I'm just being kind of a jerk, and to do that, I had to I've gotten, I think, arguably better at that. I've mentioned this to you, over in recent years. I've gotten better at dealing with guys when they're being assholes. I'm not as offended by it. Women can be assholes too, I mean, I already knew that, but I'm less worried about it now. And so I'm much more effective in working with both a man and the woman in that situation. I'm not letting the guy get away with being an asshole, but I'm also not mad at him, so I can actually talk to him respectfully. And the woman seems to appreciate it more when I do that. But that, getting back to your question, that I think there is a very real basis in that. The stories I hear of couples who have been through really bad couples therapy or bad individual therapy and have been willing to come back, and I'm always really impressed that they're willing to give it another shot when they've had bad experiences. The stories I hear often fit in that. It's like, yeah, this person we talked to could be a male or a female therapist. This person just seemed to be, it was just all my fault, the guy says. And the woman will often point that out. Woman has said, yeah, it didn't work because they just said it was all his fault. And the woman doesn't want that.
Thank you for that. And
Yeah.
I'm going to follow up on that in just a second. I want to join that one with number 4. No, I'm sorry, join that one with number 5.
You know that you know my video better than I do. I don't remember what number.
I've watched it a couple times. It's
Yeah.
great. Number 5 was that the woman thinks that the man is afraid that the therapist will side with the woman and gang up on him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is very closely related to previous one, number 4, but the plausible basis for all of this is, do you know about the study that came out in 2022, I think it was, that the lead author, first author was Paul Kammer, Intersectional Implicit Bias? It found, it's a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Attitudes and Social Cognition. At least this study found pretty clearly that the worst implicit bias of all is not against blacks. Well, no, I'm sorry. It's not against blackness, and it's not against femaleness. The worst implicit bias of all, the strongest and most negative, is implicit bias against men.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that study, but it's interesting. Yeah.
And, men grow up in this world where there is a lot of implicit bias against us. If there's a problem between a man and a woman, we know that the chances probably are that the cop is going to side with the woman, or the teacher is going to side with the girl, or the therapist is going to side with my wife. So there is a real, it's not like they're crazy to think, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't
Well,
want to go
that's
there and get beaten up. So
yeah.
if we put 4 and 5 together, and plus others that have a legitimate basis in something approximating reality,
Mhm.
suppose I'm a man whose wife is saying, look, we really ought to try couples therapy. And I'm thinking all of these things that might be reasons I don't want to do it, but I love my wife and I really do care.
Mhm.
And maybe even I'm smart enough to recognize point number one, your top reason, which is that I'm afraid.
Yes.
I'm afraid. And the reason I'm afraid is because I'm afraid I'm going to lose you. And that completely belies the idea that I don't care about you.
Yes.
I,
Precisely. Yeah.
I care about you tremendously. I am afraid that we do this thing. The therapist is going to side with you. I'm going to have to lose my integrity to stay with you. And we're going to break up.
Mhm.
But I'm smart enough to know, and I'm lucky enough to have some friends who benefited from couples therapy. What can I do as a man whose wife or girlfriend wants me to get into couples therapy? What can I do in terms of picking a therapist whom I can trust?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, that's a different question. I thought you were going to go with what can I do as a man to sort of get myself ready to do it or whatever. I will note that the premises you just laid out, you're like 99% of the way there because you already were recognizing, well, okay, I'm smart enough to realize and willing to realize I'm scared. And of course, I would add to that, if it's what I kind of the point of my video, if the woman could recognize he's scared and have some respect for that because he's not crazy to be scared, then they got a shot at actually talking about it. And then they can figure out, yeah, maybe this is a good idea. It'll help us talk about stuff. How do you pick a therapist? I have a whole section in one of my books on that. It's a rather unsatisfying section, if you ask me, because I haven't got a good answer. I don't have a simple answer. You kind of have to try. There's I can tell you what doesn't matter as far as I can tell. What school of thought they claim to be, or what training they've had seems to be more or less irrelevant to this. They could be psychodynamic, they could be behaviorist, probably not behaviorist. Well, see, that's my prejudice. They could, I mean, there's all kinds of possibility. I'm one of my big trainings was narrative, which is a kind of an interesting one because it's sort of itself countercultural. There's all kinds of schools of thought you could throw in. I don't think that predicts much. The research also often says that. The research in general about this that's gone on for years says the effectiveness of therapy isn't about what school of thought they come from. It's about whether you feel that they actually care about you, whether you feel an actual connection that they care, which I also translate as respect. You need to find someone who will respect you, respect your integrity. When our slogan, our 7 words of our, this podcast, couples therapy in 7 words. Actually, we can hold up the mug, the merch. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That have faith part actually is where that starts. And by faith, I'm not talking about necessarily religious faith. I mean, assume that neither party is crazy. You're feeling the way you feel, you probably got good reasons for it. You're probably not nuts. And if you start from that assumption, then you can respect someone's fears, and then you can actually work with them. But how do you pick a therapist? Boy, you just have to
Well,
try some.
let me ask you some questions then
Yeah,
about how you try.
yeah.
I'm a man. I'm willing to try couples therapy, but I'm not willing to spend money and spend my time and sit on a couch and be blamed for everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I want to find a therapist who will be good for our relationship.
Hmm.
So I want to ask you, could a man say to his wife, okay, look, I'm willing to think about going to couples therapy, but with all of these reasons out there and based in some semblance of reality, I got good reason to be afraid, and
Hmm.
I'm not going to do couples therapy when I'm afraid. So you want me to feel confident in my therapist? I'm going to I'm going to find a therapist that I like and feel I can trust. Then you can also talk to that therapist, make sure you like and trust that therapist, and then we go to that therapist.
Yeah.
Is it reasonable for a man to call a therapy practice or a therapy individual and say, I need a couple of minutes to just get comfortable, to get confidence in where this therapist is coming from and where they might want to try to lead us?
Mhm.
Is it reasonable for a man to expect or to ask a therapist to spend 5, 10, 15 minutes without any billing, without any reimbursement for their time?
Yeah. It's funny. I tend to say, sure, 5 or 10 minutes. Um, Beyond that, you're better off just have a session. Do you know what I mean? Like I will often say, I tell people, feel free to ask me any specific questions you might have. What I would hope is that a therapist, and I like to count myself in this, and I think I could do it, any question anybody would ask me, I hope I would be able to handle seriously. Some questions, the answer would probably be, like if a guy asked, look, do you blame men for everything? For example, if a guy just asked me that in the emails or in a phone conversation, setting up an appointment or something, I would be inclined to say, no, I really don't. I start with what I think is really deep respect for everybody I'm talking with. And, I can answer that question. But as far as how it will go, I don't, in my own experience, until you actually get in the room with folks or on the nowadays telehealth with folks and have the conversation, you don't know how it's going to go. It's like improv.
So then would it be reasonable for a man to say, okay, I get it. You can't really do more than 5 or 10 minutes. I feel like I want more than 5 or 10 minutes.
Mhm.
And I'm willing, based on what you've told me in these 5 or 10 minutes, to spend some money with you.
Mhm.
And so I would like, as an individual, to come into therapy with you.
Mhm.
And then after that 45 to 50 minutes of therapy with you, if I can leave there and feel, yeah, I can trust that guy.
Mhm.
And then I say to my wife, why don't you check him out, see what you
Sure.
think?
Yeah.
And then if it's a match, then we come for therapy. Would that be a reasonable way for a man to approach
Oh, sure.
the
And a lot
possibility?
of couples therapists do that routinely. I don't do it routinely, but a lot of couples therapists will meet individually with the both parties before they meet together. As I say, I don't tend to do that. If people ask me, I say no. Let's just we all be together and we can figure out what we want to do. There have been occasions where, in meeting together, one or the other has said, "I'd like to have an individual time with you." And the ground rule that I have for that one, which is most folks have, though not all, the ground rule I have is, sure, we can do that. It's still couples therapy. If we do that, it just means there aren't any secrets that I can be expected to keep if we have a joint session. So, if we meet individually and you say, well, don't tell my wife, but I'm having an affair, I'm not going to call up the wife, but I'm going to say, wow, I can't meet with you jointly unless you've told her about that, because I won't hold the secret. Now, again, there are folks who will, and I respect that too. But I can't rely on my memory enough. And that's one funny way of saying it. I'll say, am I supposed to tell you this? I'm not going to go there. But no, what you're describing, it's interesting. You're describing pretty clearly a man who is really worried about that. And I don't get that many. I get lots of men who are worried about that, but that doesn't mean that they want to do what you just described. It's more like, well, we'll try a time and see how it goes. My general attitude about both parties involved in couples therapy is I invite them from moment one. The very first question I ask them after my little intro speech about confidentiality and stuff, the very first question I ask is, how will you know if this is helping? I'm focusing them on that from moment one, which is to say, and at the end of the session, and this is kind of precious on my part, but what the hell? At the end of a session, I don't say, when would you like to meet again? I say, would you like to meet again? Even if I've met them, if I've been talking with them for a year and a half, because I always want them focused on the idea that, look, if you're the ones who have to decide if this is helping. Sometimes they don't agree on that, of course, very common. They have to figure that out. So, in terms of the guy you're describing who wants to make sure first, you know, the part that I'm quibbling about a little, I suppose, is I don't think there's a way to make sure until you get into it. You know what I mean? You
Well,
just don't know.
yes, but when you're dealing with a man who is torn
Yeah,
between
yeah, yeah.
making his wife happy by going to couples therapy, but also making himself happy by making sure I don't get myself into a mess that's going to just make things worse and possibly lead to a breakup. You know,
Yeah.
there are degrees of trust and confidence and fear and risk.
Yeah.
And if we can lower a man's apprehension of risk
Yes.
Yeah.
by giving him an opportunity to say, yeah, I kind of like this guy, uh, we can go to, you talk to him to make sure you like him, or the
Yeah.
woman, it could be a woman therapist. And the therapist who helped me and my wife was a woman. And I honest to God did say to her, look, I'm a retired social worker. I know that social workers are not what you are. I think she was an LMFT, licensed marriage family therapist. I said, but look, forgive me if this offends you, but I think there is a lot of sexism in the world against men, a lot of implicit bias against men. And so I would like for you to give me some assurance that you recognize that when there's a problem between a man and a woman, it's not automatically the man's fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was not offended at all.
Mm-hmm.
She immediately said, oh, I understand completely where you're coming from. And yes, I can assure you that I am aware of that bias, and you will not see it from me.
Yeah. I think the key there was the very thing you said. She wasn't offended by the question.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with somebody who's offended by your question, they're probably the wrong person to deal with.
Yeah.
And we have
and I
interviewed
think,
any number of therapists who said that they do like 15-minute consults.
Oh, yeah.
They'll do a free 15-minute consult before they start therapy. So there are people that do that. So
Yeah.
it's not out of the realm of possibility if you're looking. So
Yeah.
so a man who is thinking maybe therapy would be good for him for a variety of reasons can sort of, be an entrepreneur. He can sort of take charge and ask for what he wants. And if he doesn't get it, he doesn't get it, but he asks for what he wants. And
Well,
that's so male.
that is so. I'll tell you. Well, it is.
You say the take charge, he doesn't get it. It's, like that type of thing.
Well,
you
sure,
don't
it's
ask,
very
you
male.
don't ask, you don't get.
It's also lots of guys won't do that with therapy. They'll say, "Oh no, you pick out a therapist, and I'll let you know if I'm okay," because a lot of times they don't want to do that shopping. Because it's not their thing. They'll do it for their wife, but maybe they'll steal themselves and do it, but they don't necessarily want to do it. How we're getting close to out of time here. How can people get in touch with you? How can people learn more about your work?
Well, everything I have done and do and will be doing is at my website. I've pretty much fashioned it as a hub for what my work over the years. It's malefriendlymedia.com. Male-friendly has a hyphen in it, but not in the URL. It's
Okay. Male friendly without the hyphen.
Male-friendly media, all
Yeah.
one word, no hyphen, malefriendlymedia.com.
And we'll have that in the notes for this episode.
Terrific.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Jack.
Yes.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's been really fun. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Jack. We certainly did.
We did as well.
It was kind of an abrupt ending. We certainly did. Didn't you?
I did, yes. I think you had to burp in there. That's what was going on. See, we are totally transparent here, aren't we? Yeah, I hope you did enjoy that. And of course, we invite comments. And tell folks about this podcast. Tell folks about our books, which we mentioned earlier. Tell folks about our merchandise. We have our beautiful couples therapy in 7-word mugs in the smaller and large size. What are they?
15 ounce and 11
ounce sizes.
Right?
Yes.
We have our bags, our tote bags, and T-shirts.
And gee, how can people find those things?
Oh, what a great question. You can go to our website, ctin7.com. That's CT as in couples therapy in 7, 7.com, where you can find all our merch, you can find all our podcasts, and if you have questions that you would like us to talk about on the air, or if you yourself would like to be interviewed on our podcast, you can find places to do all of that on ctin7.com.
And we would love to hear from you. And so until next time,
remember, be kind,
don't panic,
and have faith.